Imagine a vulnerable child living in unsafe conditions with a parent who's abusive, mentally ill, addicted, or just unable to be a proper parent. Where can that child turn? Social workers are overworked, and without other intervention, a lot of children are just going to fall through the cracks. Well, you can be a part of the solution, and we're going to talk about that right now on Significant Insights. Hello and welcome to Significant Insights. Were you raised in a loving and safe home with parents who cared for your needs and nurtured you into adulthood? Or did you fear for your safety? However you answer that question, you're either grateful for your happy childhood or you know too well the pain of life as a vulnerable child. Well, today, we're talking about a very special group of people that you can join to become a lifeline to a child in need. The group is CASA, and it stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates. And here's one story of how a CASA changed the lives of 3 at-risk children. The stories on video that you're going to see on today's program are real, but to protect the privacy of the children involved, they're portrayed by others. Take a look.
The court appointed me as the CASA to Marisol, Miguel, and Carlito 3 years ago and assigned their grandmother as temporary guardian. All of the children were under the age of 3 and showed signs of physical abuse. The family situation was not good. The mother was mentally challenged, had substance abuse issues. The father was in jail for domestic violence, and the grandmother was a reluctant and not very suitable guardian. The grandmother gave me the name of a couple who had taken an interest in the children and were furnishing them with toys and clothing. I took the initiative and contacted them. They were both employed, spoke Spanish, and were completing foster training because they were interested in adoption. They also told me that the grandmother had threatened to stop contact with them unless they paid her $1,000. In my report to the court, I mentioned the attempted extortion, the couple's background, and their interest in the children. The judge ordered immediate removal of the children from the grandmother's care, and after an investigation by DCFS, the children were placed with the couple. Eventually, the court terminated the birth parents' rights. That was 3.5 years ago, and the couple that I found were finally able to adopt the children, giving them the loving home that they deserved.
Without Jerry, we wouldn't have our family, and our children wouldn't have a home. She was the first person to even meet with us. We were so excited when DCFS called. We passed our investigation, and the children were placed in our home.
Jerry continued to visit us and kept us up to date on the children. When they were eligible for adoption, we started the application process. I don't know what we would have done without her support.
A happy ending for 3 wonderful children. But it all came together through a citizen volunteer, someone just like you. And you can be a part of changing children's lives, just like CASA Jerry did for the family we just saw. Gloria Bunce is the executive director of CASA in Kane County, Illinois, and I had a chance to talk with her about the volunteer program. Here's our conversation. I wish it were possible for everyone who is watching this program to really understand how important that an organization like CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, are to the welfare of children. Mm-hmm. Over, 3 million children are victims of child abuse and neglect every year in the United States. Tell us a little bit about what CASA is doing to help these children.
Sure, Jerry. And that 3 million are just the children that we know about. So we believe that there are a lot more cases out there that are hidden, and unfortunately,
there could be at least half that many, if not as many.
Absolutely.
That are unreported.
Unreported. And CASA standing for Court-Appointed Special Advocates. So our sole purpose of existence is to recruit and train community volunteers to work with children who come into the foster care system and act as their guardian ad litem, and to get them to a place of permanency and which safe and a caring home. That's what we do.
So what are you looking for when you're looking for a really qualified CASA volunteer?
Well, and again, there is no like perfect one set style mold. It's everything from that wonderful stay-at-home mother to a court appellate judge that we've had.
Really?
Yes, and everything in between, from the
editor
banker, from the
also.
newspaper editors, you know. All we want is to ensure that, and what our program can provide is consistency. We need consistent people in their lives, because a social worker can change 3 or 4 or 5 times as that child is still in the system. But the CASA volunteer in our program is less than a 10% ratio of turnover, and the majority of that is because something personal has gone on in their lives. So having somebody that's with them the entire time, knows their history, understands their needs, and can really push the system, because we know the child welfare system is overburdened. And our role is not to make life any worse or harder for anyone else, but it's to help navigate the system, especially for these youth, and helping us get to permanency for these kids.
Well, this is not a criticism of the social agencies,
No.
but what you just said is important for people to understand. They're overburdened, number one. Number two, they're professionals. And so they approach it more from a professional, job-oriented type of perspective. The volunteer, they're doing this because they want to do it. What kind of training do they go through? You talked about 40 hours of training. There's got to be some special training, because for some of these volunteers, the first part of that relationship could be a bit of a shocker.
It is. Well, and it all starts with a general information meeting. Our Director of Advocate Education really paints a clear picture and the expectations of what it's going to take, the time commitment, and we ask at least a 2.5 to 3 year commitment if you're going to be a CASA GL volunteer. So at that point, you go home and you kind of really think it out of what you heard, and this is the time, and maybe not today, but maybe in even a few years, then they take that next step. They have to go through a fingerprinting background check, just like our board of directors do, and then they have to go through a 40-hour training. And in that 40 hours training, there's so much involved, and I think they're overwhelmed to a point, but also certainly appreciate, because I get to sit with them at the end of the training and go through certain policies. But they're so grateful that they have just learned about, you know, what these families are going through on a struggle with, you know, my goodness, through mental health and from abuse and neglect definition in itself. They learn how to do proper report writing. And then more importantly, they have supervisors, which are my staff, our professional team, that are working with the CASA volunteers to ensure the right language is involved with the reports. So when they submit that to the judge, it is exactly what she needs to, again, make best interest decisions.
What about retired people? You have a lot of retired people doing this?
Well, most people think it's, it must be all retired. No, it's actually less than 0.5%
Really?
of the people, yes. And we have
Less than a what percentage?
half of
Half.
people retired, yes.
Okay, so about 50% would be retired. Others, active professionals, you said
From
earlier,
bankers to
yeah,
homemakers to people in retail to lawyers. I mean, there's
are there
so many.
certain personality types that work best?
Well, you know, we pride ourselves, and we're always looking we work with quite a diverse population, and it's very important for us to make sure that the volunteers that recruit also have a diverse background, education, and experience. So it's like when a new case comes in, and we could have 2 or 3 cases coming in 1 week, and some have 1 child, some have 5. It's very critical to us to be able to match that child or those children with an individual that can really work with that family, understand the needs. And so through all the interviewing and the discussions that we have, we bring them back in to really go over that criteria, because it is so critical that kids are placed with the right volunteer that's going to help them navigate through the system best.
You know, we've been talking about children in CASA, but the question is what happens when a child reaches 18? Is there still a way to be of assistance to them? Well, that's another part of the CASA success story. Let's take a look at Colin's story.
Colin had been a ward of the state since he was 2 years old. When the court assigned Colin to me, he was about to celebrate his 19th birthday. Clearly, he was an exception to our goal of returning home. His case file described a 17-year history of abuse and neglect that led to numerous foster placements, halfway houses, and institutions. I've advocated for him for over 2 years. At the time I met him, Colin was abusing alcohol and drugs and had a major anger management issue. The first several months were difficult. He was uncooperative, belligerent, and often argumentative. Then, something happened.
I was really angry when I first met Bob. To me, he was just another face, someone who would be out of my life in a month or less. And Bob kept coming back, telling me that he would never lie to me. But the truth made me mad. Mad at Bob, the court, DCFS, the whole system. And it hit me. I was really scared about what I was becoming. And Bob was telling me that my fear was real, and I needed to do something about it, or my future would be on the street, in jail, or worse. I listened. With Bob's help, I completed my GED, got through a drug rehab program, and started working with my counselor on my anger issues. I'm now in a program where I have my own apartment, and have a part-time job. I hope to be on my own for the first time in my life.
The absolute importance of the CASA volunteer was shown in that.
Yes.
Here you had a young man, drug abuse, anger. A man comes into his life and says, let me help you deal with this. Probably saved Colin's life.
Well, and Bob, I know very personally, he's one of our just star CASAs. And one of the two things he said to Colin was, you can guarantee two things. One, I'm never going to lie to you. And two, I'm going to tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. And through Bob's approach and his structure, because he's a successful businessman, he was able to give Colin that structure that, you know, based on all that we know in our own children's upbringing, structure and love and confidence and security is what we all need.
You can't overestimate
that.
No.
So he stuck through him, and there was times Colin didn't like Bob very much. But you know what? To this day, now that the case is closed, he calls Bob. He's there for him, and their relationship has continued.
And probably that'll be there from now on.
I hope so, and I'm sure Bob does too.
When we return, we're going to hear the story of a woman who went into the foster care system at 6 years old. But as we go to the break, here's Monique, another CASA success story.
CASA Linda is my friend, and she helped me find a new home. I've known her ever since I was a little girl. When I lived with my mom, she was mean to me, and I was scared of her boyfriend. I told Linda about this. Now I live with Mama Betty and her family. We watch a movie every Friday night and eat pizza. I have my own room and a foster sister. Jenny is just a little older than me. We like to listen to music and dance and play with our Barbies. I love my new home. Mama Betty and Linda have told me that it will soon become my forever home.
Welcome back. We've been talking about the unique contributions of volunteer court-appointed special advocates, or CASAs, to help abused and neglected children navigate their way through the legal system and find the best home environment. Beth Mooncotch was one of those children. At 6 years old, Beth and her older brother were seriously neglected by their severely alcoholic mother. On the phone, Beth's mother told her father, who was barely in the picture and not supporting his family, that she couldn't take care of the children any longer. Then she passed out. He called the police, and then Beth picks up the story from there.
So the police actually came to we were at our grandma's condo, and my mom had blacked out, and I actually remember hiding behind her, and I remember vodka bottles all around. It seemed like there was a sea of them. Whether or not there was, that's my perception as a 6-year-old. And the police actually had to break the door down because she wasn't answering the door.
How did you feel? I mean, that had to be
we were very
an
scared.
Frightening experience.
Yes, we were very scared, and it's my understanding that they took her to the hospital, and they took my brother and I and put us in a police car and took us to a police station, and we were very frightened because even though my mom was an alcoholic and neglectful, we were always with her.
That was at least a place.
Right, it was.
And that was a mother.
Exactly. And so they took us to the police station until they could find a foster parent to take us in. And I think we arrived at the foster home at about 1 a.m.
Strangers.
Complete strangers. I remember when the foster mother answered the door, just how awkward it felt, and it didn't necessarily feel safe at the time. It still felt scary.
So in a very real sense, you were homeless. I mean, you had a house.
But
there were people, but still there was a sense of abandonment.
Oh, absolutely.
So what happened? How long did this go on?
So we stayed in that foster home for about 2.5 years. And
that long?
Yes.
In that foster home?
In that foster home. And during which time we would see our mother, depending on her consistency, whether or not she had been following whatever program she was mandated to do. And
your dad had pretty much gone out of your life by that point?
My dad had left our lives by the time I was 18 months old. I didn't know my dad at this point at all. I knew that I had a dad, but I didn't know really anything about him. Anything that I was told was negative. So I had no idea who he was or where he was. And so we would see her sometimes at a McDonald's. Then we'd move up to maybe a park visit where it was a little more unsupervised. And then we'd work our way up to a weekend. I remember a particular weekend where we went to a carnival. And I remember thinking, we're going to be in trouble. She's going to get in trouble because she was drunk. And she left my brother and I at this carnival unattended. And that's exactly what she did. She got drunk, and we had to find a police officer to help us find her.
So how did CASA come involved?
So while I was in foster care, I had revealed that I had been abused by one of my mom's boyfriends who we lived with. And
one of your foster care?
No, one of my mother's, my biological mother's boyfriends. At 4 and 5 years old, I had been abused by him. And for whatever reason, I must have felt safe enough to reveal it at that time. I told my foster parents what had happened. And at that point, CASA and DCFS worked together to provide a voice in the courtroom so that I wouldn't have to testify. And it was a difficult time. It was confusing. I just remember it being very chaotic. My mom got a little crazy when she found out. But luckily we did have a solid home, and our foster parents providing some stability through that.
So CASA then became how important to you?
CASA became important during the time that I was going through that court process. The man who had abused me was actually going on trial for it. He ended up pleading guilty, and so I never had to testify. But that is where I had a CASA, because that's the only time we were ever going through the court process. Otherwise, we were represented by DCFS, by our caseworker, and then once we were put up for adoption, we had a different caseworker for that.
At some point along the way, you became a Christian.
Yeah.
What difference did that make?
Oh, it made a huge difference. I became a Christian when I was 21, and up until that point, I would say that I was sort of a fish floundering at sea. I didn't have a clear sense of direction. I was angry. I was just, like I said earlier, kind of an emotional mess. I didn't have any self-worth or confidence. I compromised. I made several mistakes. And when I became a Christian, and there was a lot that led up to that moment, everything changed for me. My sense of worth, to know that I have a Heavenly Father that loves me and places value on my life, and that He sacrificed His Son for me, and that I'm His daughter, that made a huge difference in my life. Not only that, but to know that I have someone that cares like a father should, but how much more our Heavenly Father cares for us, that He cares about even the smallest details of my life, and to be able to pray for Him and see those answers coming forth, amazing things started happening. I can't begin.
It's interesting because the intervention of a CASA volunteer coming into your life, finding a sense of stability in a world of no stability, and then becoming a Christian, and today you're putting back into the system and the problem as a social worker. What would you say to people who are watching about the importance of CASA?
I would say that to become a CASA volunteer is not only a blessing to the child, but it becomes a blessing to you to know that you are the one person that a child can turn to and trust, especially when a lot of children in the foster care system have to go through several homes and have to tell their painful story over and over and over to so many different people. You step in and you're that voice for them. And in addition to that, to be a CASA through the transitional process, I have a high respect for that process, because to be on your own at 18 without parents is very difficult, especially if you do want to have some goals in your life, and to have somebody that's mentoring you and caring for you and walking you through and speaking truth into your life too, and getting you the resources you need.
Beth is now the mother of 4, a social worker, and a CASA advocate. To find out how to become a CASA anywhere in the country, go to casaforchildren.org. As we go to the break, here are closing comments about the impact of court-appointed special advocates.
Thank you, CASA Jerry.
CASA Bob.
CASA Linda.
There's so many faces.
So many strangers.
You were always there.
You took my hand.
Welcome back. You know, I think deep down that all of us want to make a difference in the world. We want to contribute in some way. Well, if you watch the program today and it has meant something to you, then I encourage you to find your place and make a difference. And you can do that simply by going to casaforchildren.org. Find out that place. It could be as a volunteer, it could be as a contributor. There are a number of ways that you can make a difference in the lives of abused and neglected children. I know I don't particularly like to serve on boards of directors, but when the opportunity came along, I immediately said yes. And I feel I'm making a contribution to children who need my help and to children like Beth, who become incredibly productive citizens. Thanks for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to have you, and I look forward to seeing you the next time right here on Significant Insights. God bless.